With the failure of Cloud9 at the last couple of tournaments and the failure of Team Liquid at the last few tournaments, I've looked at the North American scene and I've made an observation which I think is quite interesting, where you see this parallel that I draw, where I see the top teams in North America, the teams that should be competing to be some of the best in the entire world, I see them having similar problems or exhibiting similar behavior patterns as Ninjas in Pyjamas does. And Ninjas in Pyjamas obviously is one of the best teams in the world, but they're on the fringe of that best in the world group of the elite teams, and they're not the world number ones. So the difference is the scale on which these problems are taking place, because for NIP, the expectation should be to be number one, whereas for these NA teams, it's to be where NIP is. So it's not that we're comparing directly the results, but we're looking at the difficulties they have that manifest long term. So a quick summary would be that these teams, so NIP or the top NA teams, Team Liquid, Cloud9, in general don't seem to be able to get the other star players that would be in their area that they'd want to get to become better, because those players are either locked up in other teams in contracts or better contracts, or simply do not want to join. I mean, in the case of NIP, this actually has been the case for a while now, where the better players that they'd want were on Fnatic, who was winning everything. Or the other scenario, well, not or, and the other scenario is that as a result of not being able to get like an established star, who it'd be easy to take an established star and replace a failing aging star with them and go, right, or replace an aging failing role player and go, right, well, there's obviously someone who I know right now is better, and that's the easy way to make a move. They hold on to old talent who isn't doing well now on the basis of their name, and as a result never give a premium spot to a rising talent. Therefore the rising talent would have to be almost preternaturally better than this guy in a much worse team to then somehow prove that it would become the easy transfer. Like, well, he's much better and this guy is much worse, so put them in. And as a result, they hold on to these old players and they don't take the proper chances on the rising talent to find out if they're good enough. So in the case of NIP obviously relies still heavily on Forest and Get Right. And yeah, those players can have godlike games. The problem is they're not going to be the best combo anytime soon. They haven't been the best combo for over 2 years now. I mean, as a result, if they're not going to be amazing, your role players have got to be super sick to make up for that, or the team as a whole is going to be incredible to make up for that. But that's the problem, because the role players in NIP arguably are failing harder in general over the year than NIP stars are. So people will forgive a million bad tournaments for Exist Freiburg, but when they have a good one, or in case of Freiburg, like two out of the last 4 that are good, now all of a sudden they're singing their praises, see, they're so good, aren't we glad we kept these guys, which ignores the fact that if you don't replace the superstars and get more firepower in that way, when you have these lesser players as the role players who are having issues for a period of time especially, you give up all those tournaments during that period. So anyone who goes, yeah, but NIP won 3 tournaments this year, yeah, but maybe they could have won 7 tournaments if they had a better lineup. That's the point that we're making here. So you might ask, why is it not okay for NIP to just be a top 5, top 6 team, win the occasional tournament, have that nip magic, play crazy games, be a cool team to root for? Oh no, it's totally fine for fans to enjoy that. I enjoy that. I enjoy watching Nip play. I love watching the Nip magic games. The problem is, it's not really okay for NIP when you're analysing the team and asking what could they do to become better, because there are obvious solutions. And NIP is a team where you have to ask yourself, how did they get to the position of being 5th to 6th? What are their resources? And what are the expectations that should be set on this team in light of those 2 first factors? So they got to this position, not being one of the elite teams in the world, or being on the fringe of it, or not being the best team in the world, by not recruiting the top players or rising talents to replace the other players. They let Olofmeister, Krims, Dennis, all these players who've been fantastic players go to other teams like Fnatic. They did try to get JW and Twist, but they tried to get Twist, you know, admittedly, he's probably the one who turned down the most. They tried to get Twist, I'll give them credit for that one, but when they tried for JW was when JW also already had fallen off a bit. And he also isn't an Olofmeister, isn't a Krims level talent. Well, I guess the Krims one's debatable, but Krims used to be a monster. So they could have had superstars and then remolded the franchise and gone a different route, and maybe someone like Forrest drops off to be the 3rd star and still is fantastic, or Get Right's just an amazing lurker who doesn't have to be the star. They could have done these things. They didn't do that. But they also didn't get the rising talents. So when they can't get their star talents because the other teams are better, the player doesn't want to join, the rising talents now become the only option. And they refused that option. They ignored Epsilon. They ignored other players out there. So they wouldn't let someone like Mohdi have a chance in their team. They wouldn't let, I mean, the Epsilon players that are the obvious ones to pick is they wouldn't let Rez have a shot. Now, before Disco Doplin left Epsilon, Rez was playing as an entry player. And, you know, he was having some big series occasionally. I mean, this is a guy where he could switch it up, but he could play entry, he could play more middle of the pack, and he would have some huge series. They wouldn't give this guy a shot instead of Freiburg, no matter how bad Freiburg played. Exist now is the in-game leader, so he's got some value in that sense. But before, Exist wasn't even the in-game leader for most of the year. Threat was. So they could absolutely replace Exist with a player who can play Exist position. So an example that would be obvious to me would be someone like Freddie B. This guy also, actually, he outside of Disco Doppler and Draken were the big names in Epsilon, but Freddie B was legit like the third player. He would have monster series of his own, and that's the key thing. As long as you don't make him have to be a star, now he's going to have crazy games. So I think he's someone who for sure should at least have been considered or given a shot or allowed to stand in at some point. So NIP over 2016, this is the contrast that you need to understand and realize how underwhelming they've been. They have been quite similar to G2. And that shows how fucked up they are. Because they've been competing for elite titles, they've had close semi-finals, they made some big runs, they did win a title, or they got close to titles, etc. G2 were the leftovers and rejects of Envious. There was a dominant team in the region, Envious, and the players who couldn't be in that team or weren't wanted by Envious were left over in G2. And then out of that, they managed to forge this miracle run and all these great players. So G2 overperformed. NIP, for the expectations of what they could have done, their resources underperformed. Now, they didn't for who they have in their team. They're actually right where they should be and with the occasional overperformance, but they also had some bad performances too, like the major. So that kind of evens it out. So as a result, the expectations are different for G2 and the failures are fine for G2 in a way they're not for the guys from NIP. So now let's go over to NA and consider the same thing. Because remember, for a team like Cloud9, it's not good enough to be the best in NA. You're supposed to be where NIP is now, top 5, top 6. Admittedly, they're around in the rankings. But I mean, going really to elite status, like maybe you could make the final of a major, make top 4 at a major. If you're the guys from Team Liquid, again, when you had Simple, which kind of feels like a cheat, you got your top 4s at the majors, but you also had someone who's going to go down as one of the best skilled players in the history of this game, and he's not from NA. So I think if you look at the actual Team Liquid lineups outside of the Simple aspect, they would at best probably be getting out of groups at majors at the moment. So they've really not been able to capitalize on the moves they made. Admittedly, they've made some better moves, I think, than some of the other people have been able to get more talent. So, okay, let's consider this. In general, NA doesn't make many blockbuster moves. Optic only got Tarek after he was already considered done in CLG, and CLG wouldn't let him go because of whatever the fuck situation they had going on there. Now, I will say, Cloud9 and Team Liquid looked at Tarek, wanted Tarek, but the CLG thing blocked him. Okay, that one's fine. Team Liquid did get JDM. I'll give them fair play for that. I've always thought the GMs of Team Liquid have done a good job in general. So fair play for them trying it. It hasn't really worked out, but then they also haven't built the team around him. But I do think they did. They made a legit blockbuster trade there, and I know they had to pay a lot for it. There's also the fact, though, that NA doesn't properly apply its rising talent. Now, Cloud9 got Automatic and Stewie, not because they scouted them, thought these are fantastic players, we've got to get these players. No, they got Stewie 2K after a bunch of other players who they were inquiring about, talking to, seeing if they're available, weren't available. I mean, we're talking, like 6, 7, 8, 9 names down the list before they got to Stewie 2K and took a chance on him. So if any of those other names say yes, there is no Stewie 2K right now in Cloud9. I don't even know if Stewie 2K would have been allowed onto any of the top teams, on Optic or Team Liquid. I think everyone would have had their reasons to keep him off. So he would not be the really good player that he is right now, verging on like top 20 player in the world type guy. Well, that might be a bit far. Yeah, at times he has certainly done that. So he would never even have gotten his shot. And that kind of shows the mentality. It's only when forced into that position to try someone like him that they got him, and he turned out to be so good. Now, Automatic, he only got in because Stewie 2K is already there. Otherwise, people are like, well, I already know what Automatic's about. It's just some like, okay, player who plays for TSM, was on Neelam before. He would have never had a chance to get into the system, and the system has now elevated him to a pretty good player, right? He would never have gotten his chance. Skadoodle was terrible for a few months. Remains fairly terrible for a few months. Still allowed to stay in the team, not even considered being removed. Shroud has been whack for the majority of 2016. If you have a look at his actual career for the whole of his time in Cloud9, he only had brief spurts, like one tournament here and there, or like a month and a half where he was actually legit European level star talent. And so he's been playing a star talent role for everything before 2016, and he hasn't been living up to it. And now in 2016, he's not even playing the star role. He's more of just a role player, and he's not even that good at that aspect. But he's still allowed to be whack forever. Don't give anyone else a chance, right? Team Liquid, As much as they've made good moves, they've collected good names, but they've held on to some of those names for dear life. Like Nitro, at the end of 2015, was the star player. He was playing really well. He had a really good combo. But all subsequent moves have brought other players into the team that to work, Simple, JDM, Kuster, all need the team built around them if it's going to work. So if you have them in the team with Nitro, the problem is Nitro's the guy who is willing to give up his role and go, I'll try a different role. And that never works for him. He needs the team built around him. So either have the team built around Nitro or the other players, which means it's one or the other for Team Liquid. And they refuse to ever make that choice. And they always fall back on the fact that if you wait long enough, Nitro's going to have the odd good game, the odd good tournament, and they're going to go, right, well, I guess we can't kick him then because he might be getting good again. And then he changes role. And they just... So it never works out in that particular sense. And that's a spot that someone who's less skilled than Nitro could take up and do a better job with. I mean, I'll give you an obvious example for me. If Nitro doesn't want to play this entry role or plays it begrudgingly or can't work with the team built around him, then have Elysian Rush be your entry players. Now let's start cooking with gas when we're Team Liquid and then have more of the game based around JDM as the star and have our 2 stars be Elysian JDM. I've already started to fix the team for you right there. So one of the problems I have is if we look at the top 4 players in NA over 2016, I would rank them like this. I'd rank Elige number 1 because of what he did at majors and huge tournaments. I'd rank Stewie2K number 2 because of his impact and then the in-game leader aspect and the fact that he's actually had fairly good stability over the last sort of like 6-7 months. Then third, I'd rank Automatic. The problem is he only came in too late, so he's had a fantastic last couple of months, but that was too late, and that's also clearly a product of the system. And then fourth, I'd rank Tarek, because he's had this good spurt in Optic Way, he's been really good. And then earlier in the year, when CLG made the run to the top 8 of the major, and then made it to... had a decent little run before that at Game Show. I actually saw Tarek as having some good performances then. So these were my 4 best players from NA in 2016. 2 of those players, Stewie2K and Automatic, went totally under the radar, and I've already explained how they wouldn't be on a team of the Cloud9 status right now if others were available, if they could have gotten others, etc. They would have never gotten these 2 players. The other 2 names, Elige and Tarek, Elige just hadn't developed fully yet, and Tarek was someone where he just wasn't on the right team, it appears. And also started to figure something out by himself. So none of these players were obvious moves that people could have made to get themselves. So that's the problem with hanging on to the old names. You don't see the old names in that list there. Now, it's not that the talents that come up are sick and the talents that are good now in NA were super sick and so you had to give them a chance. No, it's that they showed some potential and nobody was giving them the proper chance. I mean, you look at the Optic lineup they have now. Take out Tarek, take out Mixwell, because Mixwell's European and Tarek was known as a good player. Everyone else in that lineup was considered a reject in NA. No one was interested in them when they were in their last 2 or 3 teams. When they were in Tempo Storm, when they were in Team Liquid for people like Daps. Obviously, you had people like Rush and Roka. They were in teams that were kind of whack back then as well. Roka, I don't know why I'm including Roka. It's because he was in the old lineup that had Daps in, etc. So, Automatic was sat in Neelam for 2015. No one was interested in this guy. Even when he went to TSM, which was a terrible signing, by the way, because it went from Complexity to TSM, even that didn't make a lot of sense the way he was used. The old Denial lineup of 2014 have practically all gotten their shot now. So exclude Anger, because he already was an old school player, had been in iBuyPower. So they had Daps, Shazam, Fogley, and who would the 5th player have been there? Fogley, Daps, Shazam. I can't remember. I can't remember that 5th on there. Whatever. But you can see the talent that comes through comes from that lineup. But again, people wait until they prove themselves by beating them until they give them a chance. So the problem with the current system for both these teams is that it doesn't work. Because at the moment, both these teams are using the logic which in theory would work, right? Which is like, right, well, I'll let those players prove to me how good they are in other teams, and then I'll just swoop in and get them because I'm the bigger team. Now, that didn't work for NIP because those players proved it, but then we're in teams where they didn't want to join NIP, and also saw this mentality in NIP that they won't kick before everybody exists, so I'll be the one that gets kicked if we do badly. And then they also became better than NIP, like Fnatic did, and likewise in NA. These players either got on the teams as good as Cloud9 or better, so they won't join like the Team Liquid players wouldn't, or they got into a situation where they're like, well, I have an awesome contract over here, or I can't get up my contract over here, and therefore Cloud9 couldn't recruit them. So the only option left for teams like NIP and Cloud9 right now is to recruit talent. They can't take the top talents elsewhere at the moment. So they've got to look at this rising talent, and they've got to be the ones now that give them a chance, because there's no longer a farm system that they can take from. So if we look at rising talents at the moment, the two most obvious ones are the ones that were on TSM, Sick and Twists. Now, I think of those two, I think the real one is Sick, right? This is a guy where he's had some really solid performances, but he's only had a few lands. He needs more lands, he needs more experience, but you put him into a lineup in his role, and I think this guy already would develop within 6 months. Now, Twists, I think it's just all right. I think he might be worth a gamble for some teams out there, some of the lesser teams, like an Optic type team, or Team Liquid maybe, but I wouldn't go hell for leather on that one. I mean, maybe for Team Liquid he could fit in instead of Shroud. Depends how they want to play that role. Now for Rush, I can't really call him a rising talent. He's been around for so long. But I just think that he's not a joke as a player. I don't know why people overlook it. I don't think he's some super amazing player. But I think he's a system player. If you put him into a team, and since he's an entry, I think they're in pretty hot demand in NA. You put him into a team that's better than he's in currently right now. He's already in a pretty decent team in Optic. But if the difference is, if he played in Team Liquid, or he played in a Cloud9, maybe if he playing Cloud9 now, I think this guy could do a lot of work. I think he could be better than he is right now. So I would summarize it like this. The reason why NA is like NIP is because just as NIP, for their expectations, which is to be world number one, NIP will never be the world number one again with Exist and Freiburg. It's got to be one or the other, if not both, but one or the other most likely. Cloud9 will probably never be an elite team with both Shroud and Skadoodle. Probably got to be at least one goes. Team Liquid will never be an elite team with both Elysian and Nitro, it seems. Probably one of them has to go. I mean, in this scenario, probably Nitro, right? Because Elysian's a fantastic player. But you see the point I'm making.